Hello and welcome to Sound Financial Bites. My name is Paul Adams. I am your host with my co-host, Cory Shepherd. Good to have you, Cory, and so glad you're a co-host of ours and no longer a special guest.
I am excited to admit. Are we just going to call this my first official co-hosting just to celebrate it? Have a cake?
Well, I mean, to celebrate it and or make fun of you for all the times that you were on the podcast before where we just had you as a special guest, I'm fine with either.
I did not have appropriate representation. I need a better agent next time. Get some.
Tell you what, we'll double what we pay you for doing the podcast.
Whoa.
Speaking of doubling something that is already not very high, is the idea of what it's costing you. The title of our podcast today is What You Don't Know Is Hurting You. You see, there's all kinds of things that we think about with money and finance that we're not always present to the kind of impact it could have on us. Now, typically what people do is they avoid or ignore the negative impact of some of the things that they can do. And right before we deep dive into this today, I want to let you know some of what we're doing to modify our podcast. We have been simultaneously recording all of these with video, posting it up on YouTube to give you some of the additional visual pieces to help you with your learning. And at the end of every podcast episode, we're going to give you the download link where you can go get the visuals. So if you're a just avid podcast listener, but then you periodically want to actually see some of the tables, charts, everything that we share, we're going to get that to you. Our objective is what? To give you bite-sized pieces of financial knowledge so that you can help yourself design and build a good life. We know that those of you that we resonate with are going to reach out to us, want to hear our philosophy, and maybe build a relationship. So with that, Cory, maybe we could kick off with you sharing with everyone just what are the rules that the financial institutions run by they're not even talking about with us.
Yeah, and I will preface this that we're not talking about any kind of black hat conspiracy. A lot of these companies, most of the companies you can do business with are American institutions with real people, real Americans, got families, need to put food on the table. And if they're providing a service, that's great. The problem is usually folks become customers and don't know the rules of the game that they're playing. And those rules are, 1, they want to get your money. 2, they want to continue to get it on an ongoing basis. They want to keep it for as long as possible. And then they want to give it back slowly over time. So not picking on any specific products, but let's just take one that almost everyone has that's listening to this podcast, the 401k. It's not an accident that almost everyone has one and that it fits perfectly all 4 of those rules. Now that's just, in fact, that just is.
And we've talked about that before. You can go back. If you search our podcast strand, you can see some of our past episodes on 401k. And what will amaze you is all of the interests that are aligned in us simply wanting us all to do a 401k the way that they recommend it. For instance, if you've been at a 401k enrollment meeting, it's like they will kind of mention the Roth option if you have one, but they don't go very deep into it. Why? Well, because they'd much rather, if you had the ability to save $10,000 this year before tax, which includes part of your tax bill, so that they get to manage $10,000. But if all you were going to be able to do after tax in Roth was $7,000, if you're the financial institution now with these 4 rules, which one are you going to do? And that's the major conflict that we have, is that these institutions, much to Cory's point, they may have wonderful individual people in them, but the drawback is that they are anchored in these rules. And as a result of being anchored in these rules, they have their interests of trying to get as much fees or as much costs off the table. And the only thing hampering that is the informed investor that understands some of the concepts we're going to talk about today, so that you can do something about it, so you can ask more critical questions. And it's things like that that have driven down some of these internal costs inside of investments over the last 10 years. We're just hoping to further that mission by educating you with this. So, yeah. Cory, just high level, what we're going to hit.
Yeah, I was thinking there's really 3 themes inside of those 4 rules that are going on with your portfolio that you don't really know when you're investing in the market. One is survivorship bias. One is that the industry is all in on the stock picking game. And the other is the undisclosed internal costs of mutual funds. And that is the real cap of the what you don't know is hurting you. It's like the gym membership that you forgot you have and you haven't been to the gym for 6 months and they're just billing you every single month, but you're getting nothing
In-
for it.
Indeed. Well, let's hit that first one, survivorship
Right.
bias. If you guys are not familiar, I'll just give you a slight background on this idea of survivorship bias. If you're a avid podcast listener of ours or client, this is going to sound familiar, but yet worthwhile because it doesn't just apply to investments. If I want you to just think investments, if it's the first time you're hearing this, if you've heard this before, now start to think where else this applies because it's one of the most prevalent economic theories out there that has to do with this decision-making bias that people have. And it can affect all kinds of career and business decisions for you as well. So it starts all the way back to World War II. You know, when we have large events, we will often ask a room full of people if there's any World War II buffs and ask people where they think we won World War II. And people will say the beaches of Normandy, or they'll mention the Pacific Theater, or maybe the tide change that occurred in the Battle of the Bulge that allowed the Allies to really be able to overcome the Axis powers. And in that, it was it was an incredibly difficult time. There were all kinds of calculations being done, and there was also this department, and there was a team of people that, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to call them the Department of Applied War Math. But what they did is that there would be all of this data that was gathered by the generals in the field sent to these mathematicians, and the mathematicians would crank through it and send back recommendations based upon the data that they had. Now, the main core of these folks were in a smoke-filled apartment in Harlem. And what I would contend, and many economists say, is that they were likely responsible for winning World War II. Now, why is that? Well, one of the things that the generals sent out, and for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see this or downloading the attachments later, is a scatter graph of a World War II bomber. And what they did is they collected the data as these bombers made their runs, came back, and they were shot all to heck. And they noticed where all these holes were, and they wanted to send it to these mathematicians and have them get back to say, here's where to add the extra armor. Here's how much extra weight it's going to be. Based upon that extra weight, here's how much less in fuel they'll be able to carry, direct translation, range of the bombers. And here's how much less in munitions, bombing capacity they'll be able to carry. Now, what was something that gave us the large dominance in World War II was our long-range bombing capacity. And all of that was done. The research was done. The math was done. The project was getting ready to go out the door. And a mathematician who was not working on that project, named Abraham Wald, happened to see it going out the door. And he said, stop. You are studying the wrong aircraft. And they're like, what do you mean? And he took the scatter graphs and pulled them together. And if you're looking at this visual now, you'll see it. Cory, could you just share with our audience what you see on the scatter graph of where there are no hits?
Right. Yeah. So we've got red dots, all kinds of places except for the engines and the middle of the wings and the weakest part of the tail section.
Yep. And the cockpit has no
Right.
holes. And so why would that be? Well, those are the planes that went down. They never made it back. And because those planes went down and never made it back, they were not included in the analysis. And Abraham Wald said, no, the only thing we have to armor are these very few areas where shots hit that prevented the plane from coming down. And it created this economic theory called survivorship bias, which is we tend to only look at the survivors in any particular business or economic situation and make our decisions based upon the survivors. The problem with doing that is you have incomplete information about who didn't survive, therefore not preserving your own survival in the most effective way. That was minimal amount of armor that was required in very specific areas so that we retained our long-range bombing capacity as well as our capacity to put a lot of armaments on these aircraft. So how does that apply to what we do in finance? Well,
You know
let's
how I
just
always
look.
think about it is
Yeah.
this just came to me. The people are awesome videos where someone's like drop kicking a football 100 yards and getting into a basketball hoop. And you're
Yeah,
like, that's
dude, perfect.
amazing. Right.
Yeah, like
How did
every
they
dude perfect video.
how did they get that to happen? And then you think, oh, they probably had a couple of hundred takes to get that one. And the financial industry is the same. How many failed funds or failed money managers did they have to churn through to get that one that they can write an article about that beat the market for a huge number of years in a row.
Absolutely. And now, how does that work in the mutual fund business? Cory gave you a little bit of foreshadowing there, but it's very simple. If you have two mutual funds, if you're a mutual fund company, put yourself in those shoes that you're starting a mutual fund. And what happens is you have two funds. One, they're both mid-cap funds. They're just investing in middle-sized companies. One goes up 10% per year for 3 years running. The other one takes a hit. It's gone down 10% per year for 3 years running. Now, of those two funds, which one's getting closed, Cory?
It's not the one that's getting the good reviews.
That's right.
Yeah.
The one that's going up in return, what they will tend to do is close the funds that don't do as well. And what you'll notice, and if you've been an investor for about any horizon of time, you've probably experienced this, where you get a note in the mail from your 401k or mutual fund saying, here at, I'll just pick on Oppenheimer, here at Oppenheimer, we have chosen, because of economies of scale, better uses of our investors, we have two investment management teams that are managing very similar funds. We're going to be merging these two funds together. So just notice on your next statement, we're not changing strategy, but instead of the mid-cap super fund, you're now in the mid-cap really great fund. And they've merged together.
It's
Merger.
like
But here's
Pac-Man
right, because when they run
merging with a Pac-Man dot. That's the kind of merger.
Yeah, exactly. And what they don't do is send people back their money. Like, oh, hey, we're sorry this fund didn't work out. Here's your money back. No, they fold it into the other fund. But when they fold it in the other fund, what you would think they would do is some kind of averaging of returns between those two, but they do not. And in ways we've explained in longer form and some of our other podcasts, they are able to move that money in and then they erase the returns of the negative performing fund. So literally your next fund statement you get that shows you the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year returns, you're seeing the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year returns upon the fund you were rolled into, not your actual experience. Said another way, it's a little bit like a kid going to college dropping classes. They drop the class still costs the parents something, but it doesn't count against them anymore. That's the exact same thing with mutual fund companies. Now, how bad is it? Well, to give you just a high level view of it, and for those of you that want this data, you can hit the domain link we're going to give you at the end of the podcast and in the show notes. You'll be able to see this. But this is just data as of the end of 2013. There's been a total of 54,364 mutual funds established. Of that, at that time, about 23,000 had been closed. So just think about that for a moment, that we nearly have, in fact, I think by today we have as many mutual funds closed as are currently open. And each time they do that, they're able to wipe out the negative returns of those funds. In fact, if you just took the worst 200 of the funds that have been closed, it's like almost negative 80% that they didn't have to count in their overall returns. So next time mutual fund company says 75% of our funds beat the 4-year Lipper average of their peers, it could be said 75% of our funds that we let live, they outperform their peers.
I mean, and it's just, we can talk about it and it even sounds so casual, but just think about, a basketball team gets to pick the 10 worst games that they had and remove those from the record just because they want to. Like,
Yes.
how
That's a
would
great
the
one.
league stay in business? How would anybody know who was the best team in the league? It is this huge problem and no one's talking about it. No one actually knows how the industry is actually doing. Well, we do actually. Most people don't know. We're going to be able
Yeah,
to
that's
tell
right. It's just not obvious. And you just have to look a level deeper. We're going to give you some actual actions to take at the end of this podcast, things you can do. Now, this next set of slides, we're not going to speak to them deeply. You can look at them more in depth, but here's the base gist of it when you get a chance to look at it later. Even if we take those asset managers who outperformed the index that they wanted to be compared to, which typically, depending on the period of time, even over 5-year horizons of time, this is as little as 25% or less that actually outperform their index. Over 15-year horizons of time, it's more like 17%. But what this graphic shows you is even if we only assess those who outperformed, say over a 5-year period, and look at them over, say, the next 3 or 4 years, the same percentage outperform. So even the people that are outperforming the indexes are not doing so in any predictable or dependable way, meaning that it may not matter if we have Morningstar ratings or past history and we chase around the quote unquote fund managers that are doing a good job. There's just no academic evidence we can point to that there's any predictable methodology for being able to pick the people that might be able to perform with the market or beat the market. So
I'm chomping. This makes me chomp to go on to number 2. Are we ready to do that?
Almost.
Okay.
Here's where I want to land with this. Just know that anybody who's saying we've outperformed the market, or we're going to outperform the market, or they're prognosticating this is where the market's going to go next, they don't know. There's no evidence. And even the people who manage to beat the market 10 years or more in a row, there's zero evidence that they're going to be able to do it in the future. And that is like the biggest lesson that you could take away from this first piece. Cory, kick us off on the next one.
Well, so here's the problem. Everything that we've just talked about is true, yet the industry is still all in for the stock picking game. So it's kind of like the proverbial kid going after the cookie jar. They've got their hand in the jar. Their mom's like, "Are you stealing cookies?" I'm like, "No, I'm not taking any cookies." With their hand in the jar right there. That's what's happening every single day.
Resting my hand on the cookies, mommy. That's it. Well, and what we are taught, here's what I think has distracted a lot of America, is that there's this like two polar opposites pulling on each other, both saying the other one's wrong and is in some form or fashion robbing from you. And I'm going to give two polar opposites here, but you guys can apply it to the institutions you want. Let's look at E-Trade and Morgan Stanley.
Oh, yes.
Morgan Stanley, full service, wirehouse, asset managers. Work with us. We'll help you perform better in the market. We've got wonderful asset managers, and our job is to beat the index. Okay, that's like we're after that. E-Trade, on the other hand, says those guys are expensive. They can't do it. You need trades that are. There's actually one called Robinhood now. It's just free. I don't know, they advertise to you or sell your data. I don't know, but it's free. But there's E-Trade, $4 trades, whatever they do, and you don't need those guys. Now, here's the part that's lost. This is the skill that it takes in looking in the negative space. Okay. It's like looking at a painting to find the art where they didn't paint. In this case, what they're actually both saying is that someone can beat the market. E-Trade is saying, you can do it. You can beat the market. You know better. Morgan Stanley is saying, we've got some really smart people that can beat the market. And they're both, in a way, I don't want to say conspiring, not Black Helicopter conspiring, but they are both inside the same story, reinforcing one another in something that is been proven repeatedly as unattainable, which
Like
is the ability to consistently or predictably beat the market.
They would say that they're completely different worlds, but they're actually playing exactly the same game. The only difference is who's hitting the buttons.
That's it.
Yeah.
That is it. And yet, but they're both, in a certain way, they're both very happy that the other one's doing what they're doing, because they're both continuing to perpetuate the myth that the market can be beat. Now, you may have to go back to listen to our 6-part series on the illusions of investing so that you can get grounded in the fact that the market is not beatable. The information happens too fast. Everything revolves so quickly that we can't predict or trade or get ahead of the market as an individual, and not even the highest, wealthiest, best paid hedge fund managers in the world. Hedge funds are known for this really bad survivorship bias because of how often they just flame out. But the ones that are still standing look like hedge funds would be a great place to be with your money. It just doesn't work that way. Now, next, we have this issue of the real cost of owning these mutual funds. You see, owning these mutual funds is far more expensive than what most people realize. Part one. Part two is, not only is it more expensive than most people realize, but that means that these asset managers have to outrun. They have to outrun not only the index, but outrun the costs they're creating trying to beat the index. And those costs go up the more that they trade. Easy way to think about it is like running with a parachute, right? That you're running with a parachute. The faster you try to run, the more resistance there is on you. And that's what these guys are trying to get ahead of. Sorry, Corey.
No, I'm glad that you went that way because I was thinking, they're outrunning the index and they're trying to outrun themselves. So it's like winning a race against yourself with a parachute on.
Yes.
The parachute
Yes.
doesn't actually matter. The fact that you're racing against yourself, how are you gonna get there? It's
Well, and
yeah.
and here's the thing. You won't see articles like the one that we can send you. If you hit our page and put in your email address, you're going to get this article from us. It's the real cost of owning mutual funds from Forbes. This is back in 2011. You will not see that many articles like this from outlets like Forbes, from outlets like Money Magazine, Smart Money, etc. And why you're not going to see too many of them is just flip through the pages or look at all the banner ads. Most of the advertising is from financial institutions selling these products. So let's just look at the real expenses in, say, a taxable account that you might have some mutual fund money in. Number one, you might have an expense ratio of that mutual fund of 0.9%. Okay. Everybody sees that one that's right in your perspective is super clear. The next one is the ones nobody talks about. The first one is something called transaction costs. You see, when you own a mutual fund and your mutual fund manager is trading, it's kind of intuitive. You'd think they're paying for the trading costs out of that 0.9%, but they don't. The trading costs are paid out of the proceeds of each trade. Like, to make it simple, if there's a 100,000, this is oversimplification for the sake of this, 100,000 of Microsoft owned by the mutual fund, they sell the 100,000 of Microsoft, but it cost $1,000 in costs to trade the Microsoft. They don't report that $1,000 in costs in your expenses. They just report as a gain the $99,000 proceeds from the sale. And the more they trade, the worse that gets. And there's actually some academic tools we're going to point you to where you can do this analysis on your own, where they look at these funds, how much their turnover is, and create some predictability around how much the transaction cost is dragging. The next one is cash drag. See, when you're in a regular retail mutual fund, you are locked arms with a whole bunch of other people. The problem is, and what I mean to say in a very nice way, is that usually when I say it's going to be in a nice way, Corey, I'm about to be just
I get
offensive enough.
nervous. If you can't see the
Yeah.
video, I'm like cringing just a little bit.
But what they do is you are locked arms with a bunch of weak people. Okay. And what I mean by weak people is people who have not hardened their own resolve in their investment discipline. And when times are volatile, it's the best time for wealth distribution. Wealth gets redistributed from the undisciplined investor to the disciplined investor. But large mutual funds have to keep a lot of money in cash because they have to deal with redemptions from the people who are undisciplined. And those redemptions of the undisciplined investor hurt you in two ways. One is this cash drag that could be upwards of 0.8% in this Forbes article, plus the tax cost, which is they have to sell things and they don't want to sell their positions that are down. The mutual fund manager wants to sell their positions that are up so that it looks like they're still doing a good job despite people exiting their fund, which creates tax impact to those people that stayed true to the fund. So it's like you're trying to survive surf torture in Hell Week, locked arms with a bunch of pansies that the first time they get hit with a wave, they're going to start crying, crawl up the beach and ring the bell. And that's fine if you have somebody else to grab onto. If you happen to be a former Navy SEAL listening to this podcast and you've been through Hell Week. But here's the thing, we don't have that. Those people walk up the beach, ring the bell. We don't know they did. That just hurts us tax impact and cash drag wise. Those are real costs, but that means your mutual fund in a taxable account that tells you it's got 0.9% cost could be above 4%. And they didn't have to disclose any of the extra that took it from 0.9 to 4. And oh, by the way, that doesn't count if on top of that, you're paying that asset manager 1%. You see, people wonder why. I'm going to get a little passionate here, Corey, my apologies. But people wonder why they feel like they're swimming tied to a tree when it comes to their money. This is why. Because nobody's talking about this drag.
And this one has been in plain sight the whole time. No one just really doesn't realize it. Like, I just keep coming back to the fact that it's called a mutual fund for a reason. And everyone thinks it's mutual, like all of these stocks are in there together, which is partly true, but it's also because you are in it together with anyone else that you've bought into that fund with, because their behavior impacts your results. There's no way around it. And I think almost no one is thinking about that when they buy their first mutual fund.
Yes, I think that's well put, Cory. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, come back, tell you what you can do about all this and how you can use this information to do something different with your finances today. Hey, everyone. I want to let you know I'm interrupting this podcast for a good reason. If you're someone who's enjoying this podcast, if our philosophy is helping you better think about money, then this offer is for you. We've opened up a financial inquiry call for our listeners of Sound Financial Bites. Our financial inquiry call is 15 minutes where one of our team will ask you some key questions, understand your concerns, and if appropriate, schedule you for a philosophy conversation with myself or Sound Financial Group's president, Cory Shepherd. If you email us at info@sfgwa.com with inquiry in the subject, we will reply back to you with a link to our team calendar so you can schedule a call at a time that's least invasive for you. Even if we're not a fit, the team member having the call with you will point you in the direction of resources we have that can help you in whatever the next step for you in your financial journey is. Now back to your podcast already in progress. Welcome back. We're so glad you guys are hanging here with us. We've gone a little bit analytical today, but we're going to give you some practical outcomes of things that you can do. So to start with, what we want you to think about is you can write down this domain name. You can look at it in the description on the podcast. hurtingyou.sfgwa.com. That's hurtingyou at sfg or hurtingyou.sfgwa.com. But here's the things we want you to think about. Number one, you feel like you can't trust the market. We know there's some of you out there like, I can't trust the market. I just buy real estate or just invest in my business, whatever. The thing is, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's that you cannot trust the market. In fact, the free market is one of the most dependable things that we have in our entire life, that we can count on the way it will behave. What you may not be able to trust are all the institutions that try to stand between you and your participation in a free market. Okay. And it's that obfuscation. I can never pronounce it.
Nailed it.
I definitely can't spell it. I need to learn sign language to just sign that one word, but it's the block that's between you and you participating in your investment results that causes most of the pain that people relate to as I can't trust the market. It comes to you as people selling you on changing your investment strategy, selling you on the next new cool investment tool, selling instead of what we're going to talk about in the next podcast is how you can build a disciplined strategy. But number one, what you can do is you can put yourself in a position to realize it's not the market you can't trust. It's the way most people participate in the market. But if you stay in the market, so people are like, I just want to time the market. You got to abandon the idea of timing the market. The highest paid professionals in the world can't time it. But what you can do is be disciplined and spend the appropriate amount of time in the market.
Yeah.
So the next graphic that's up on YouTube or that you can download shows you a history of the ups and downs of the market since like the 1920s, I think this one is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Late 1920s. And you can get a sense of how unoften there's actually been significant downturns. It really hasn't been that often in the span of somebody's investing career, even if you're in something as volatile as the Standard & Poor's 500 index. It's even less than this if you had an academically allocated, globally diversified portfolio. And on the next slide that you're going to be able to see, we also have this idea of the market goes up and down a lot in any given year, regardless of its performance for the calendar year. So one of my favorites is like 2009, where the market at its worst in 2009 was down like, it looks like about 30, and its highest was up like 70%, but it ended that year up like 25 or 30% after the big downturn in 2008. Here's the thing. All throughout every single year, good or bad, there were times you could have been freaked out, scared, and made bad decisions. Now, you're listening to this podcast. You're not the person making those decisions, but like you're not jumping out when you shouldn't, I hope. But they're people to your right and left, those who have not hardened their resolve around investing, haven't taken the time to learn enough. They are bailing on you. And when they bail on you, it puts you in the position to take those additional tax costs and maybe even potentially losses as a result. So what we want you to be able to do is be in a position that you can hold strategy, that you are not taking risks you shouldn't have to take, because despite of how the ups and downs go throughout the year, you know that the market is a lot like a guy walking up a set of stairs who's holding a yo-yo. And while he slowly progresses up the stairs, the yo-yo will go up and down, which looks more volatile than the actual climb up the stairs. And to focus on the fact that the free market is climbing up the stairs over time. It's lifting people out of poverty worldwide, and it's putting us as individuals, and it's putting us as business folks in the position to be able to reserve the appropriate amount of money that we need for the long run for our retirement, and we don't need to let all these institutions take so much of it. So with that, we want you again, hit hurtingyou.sfgwa.com. That's hurtingyou.sfgwa.com. And now, my favorite part of the show, we're starting to select and highlight certain reviews to the podcast. If you have had a chance to review our podcast, here's what we'd like you to do. Give us an honest review, take a screenshot of it, email that to info@sfgwa.com. That is info@sfgwa.com. And what we will do is send you a copy of one of our books or Michael Michalowicz's new book, which is Clockwork. I think you guys will love that. Michael Michalowicz, great friend of the show, and certainly one of the most respected business authors in the marketplace right now. So we got a review from John ACW. So John, thank you so much for this. He said, I want to applaud both Paul and Cory for providing some of the best financial education out there. I consider myself pretty knowledgeable financially. However, I'm continually having to confront the validity of all the sacred financial cows out there. Sacred cows that could cost you lots of money over the long run. I'm sure they got a lot of flack for swimming up against the financial current out there. Thank goodness somebody's doing it. Best of all, these guys are very generous in educating people for free. I think these guys deserve your time, attention, and ultimately your business. Kudos, guys. Well, I got to tell you, John, I believe I know what John that was, but I got to tell you, thank you, John. That probably couldn't have been said better. We do get a fair amount of flack for it. I think one of the biggest ways we get flack, and Cory, I don't know if you would agree with this, but is that we give all of this away. There are financial people out there that want to keep things close to the vest. And here we are. I think we're crossing a couple 100 hours of content, not counting books, that we give out there for free for people to be able to take, enjoy, and challenge their existing financial relationships to be more transparent and give you more full situational awareness with your money.
Yeah, I agree. I think people can be a little nervous, like, wait, you're giving this so much away for free. What's the catch? Especially when we meet with them. And it's like, no, we love gossip as long as it's positive gossip about us. And this is a big part of why we do this.
Exactly right. Well, we're so glad all of you could join us today. Join us in our next episode, which is investing like a Nobel nerd. We're going to give you the flip side of all of this that we've just exposed to put you in a position so that as your income climbs, as you start making more money than you've ever made before, we talk about that as the white coat window, whether you're a physician, an executive, or a founder of a business, that you hit that window where you make more money than you've ever made before. Now you're trying to figure out what to do with it. We're going to show you in our next episode how to counter some of the stuff that exists inside the current, inside the way people think about money, so that you can do the best possible job of designing and building a good life.